Hello, I am Dr. Georgiana Stanciu, the museum curator. Happy to welcome you to Curated Tour number 8. As usual, this is a Zoom recorded event, which is why you are muted and the cameras are off. But we will be taking questions in the chat box at the end. This is the closing event of the Curated Tour series. And before starting, I have to thank all my guests throughout 2022. We started with Dr. Gord Heath. We also had Ms. Jessica Stevenson. And last but not least, Dr. Brad St Croix. And I would also like to reiterate that all these events were recorded and are now available on our YouTube channel. Dr. St Croix and myself share an interest in forgotten events or operations of the Canadian military history. He's contributed to no less than 6 of the 8 episodes. He is with us today again, and he will be talking about the defense of Hong Kong in December 1941. A small force formed of 2 Canadian infantry battalions, commanded by a former member of the Royal Canadian Regiment, Brigadier J.K. Lawson, was shipped to the Pacific to take over garrison duty from the British Army. They came under attack by Japanese forces, and Britain was forced to surrender the island to the enemy by Christmas 1941. I'm now inviting Dr. St Croix to share with you and myself more details from his extensive research. He knows everything about this topic because it was his doctoral dissertation. Brad.
Perfect. Thank you again for having me on the series, and today again to talk about, as you said, the subject of my doctoral dissertation. So again, excited to talk about this and always wanting to talk about Battle of Hong Kong and Canada's role in it whenever possible. So thank you yet again. So today I'm just, like I said, going to try and take a Canadian focus just on this because, again, limited time. I want to cover that as much as possible. So just kind of why are Canadians in Hong Kong in the first place is a question I get a lot. So I always like to explain kind of briefly why that is. So it's all the result of kind of a series of conversations that were had between Brigadier Arthur Edward Gressett, who was the former commander of the British garrison at Hong Kong and a Canadian by birth and trained at RMC. He had a conversation with General Harry Curiar, along with J.L. Ralston, the defense minister, in the summer of 1941. And of course, Curiar at this point is the chief of the general staff of the Canadian Army. So these conversations, we're not really sure what happened in them. We know that Curiar gave testimony at the commission about Hong Kong later on, but during that time, Curiar denies Hong Kong ever coming up specifically, and Canadians could be sent there at all. But with the series of events that happens afterwards, it seems that's very unlikely. So Gressett returns to Britain through Canada and meets with the British chiefs of staff and tells them that Canadians can reinforce Hong Kong. Gressett had been pushing for reinforcements for Hong Kong, basically his entire tenure there for a few years. So on September 19th, 1941, the Dominion's office cables Ottawa asking for Canadian troops to be sent to Hong Kong. Canada more quickly says yes, and then the Canadians leave in late October. The Canadian force, known as Sea Force, nobody pulled any creative muscles with that one, arrives in Hong Kong on November 16th, 1941. So as Dr. Stanciu already mentioned, Sea Force was composed of 2 major, most of it was composed of 2 infantry battalions, the Royal Rifles of Canada from Eastern Quebec and the Winnipeg Grenadiers. Also accompanying them are, of course, the headquarters staff led by Brigadier J.K. Lawson, again, former member of the RCR, and other support troops and headquarter troops. So the Canadians joined the British garrison already in place, which comprised of the 2nd Battalion Royal Scots, 2nd Battalion 14th Punjab Regiment, the 5th Battalion 7th Rajput Regiment, 1st Battalion Middlesex Regiment, operating as a machine gun battalion, and the Hong Kong Defence Force, Volunteer Defence Force, comprised of all arms. So the battle itself begins on December 8th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked the mainland portion of the colony known as the New Territories. The garrison's main line of defense on the mainland was known as the Gin Drinkers Line. Not the best name, but it anchored on the bay called Gin Drinkers Bay, hence taking its name. So this position was estimated to hold out possibly for weeks, days, possibly months, but it's quickly overrun, basically in the course of a day and a half, causing a retreat, which begins on the 11th of December. So the majority of the Canadian troops remain on the island during this phase of the fighting, except for D Company of the Grenadiers. They are sent across to the mainland and fight a rearguard action against the Japanese, in which they fired the first shots in anger by the Canadian Army during the Second World War. So once the retreat to the island was completed, and it was done fairly well and in a very orderly fashion, the troops were split into two brigades, the East and West Brigades. The Royal Rifles were placed in the East Brigade under the command of British Indian Army officer Brigadier Cedric Wallace, and the Grenadiers were in West Brigade under Lawson's command. So the Japanese bombarded the island quite mercilessly for a week, attacking everything from artillery positions, major roads and road junctures, and bunkers and defensive positions. Again, for a week, causing all kinds of disruption to the garrison's lines of communication and their defenses. So the Japanese troops came across the short little Mailoon Passage that separates the island from the mainland on the northeast corner on the 18th. And despite some good initial resistance from the Indian troops holding the shoreline and Canadians a bit further inland, the Japanese had split the garrison in two by the 19th. So there's many acts of Canadian heroism and kind of martial ability in this battle, but again, short time, so I'm only going to mention a few. So one that always comes up with Hong Kong is the only Victoria Cross that's awarded during the fighting that went to Company Sergeant Major John Osborne of the Grenadiers for his actions on Mount Butler on the 19th. So after retreating from a Japanese counterattack on the hill itself, Osborne and some Grenadiers took up positions in a building. The Japanese quickly surrounded them and began lobbing grenades into their position through the open windows. And Osborne was throwing them out as quickly as he could, reaching them and getting them back out. But one landed in a position he knew he couldn't get to very quickly. He shouts out a warning to the men around him, telling them to get back. He jumps on the grenade and is killed instantly as it goes off. But he saved the lives of those men in that building with him. And for that action, he's awarded the Victoria Cross. Also on the 19th, Lawson's headquarters at the Wang Ni Chong Gap, basically the center confluence of the island where all the major roads meet, still even to this day, was surrounded by Japanese troops. He's in discussions with his commander, Major General C.M. Maltby, who is the garrison commander in Hong Kong, about what to do. And basically, Lawson knows there's not much he can do. So the last thing Maltby hears from Lawson is he tells Maltby he's going outside to fight it out. He's never heard from again, and his body is later found amongst the dead surrounding the headquarters. Across from Lawson's headquarters, a little bit down the hill, is D Company of the Grenadiers. They held out against the Japanese attacks, intense Japanese attacks, for 3 days in a series of buildings, not designed as defensive positions. Luckily for D Company, the position itself was well stocked with machine guns, Bren guns, and plenty of .303 ammunition, which they used to take a very heavy toll on the Japanese. So once these forces could no longer hold out because ammunition and water had run out, the walking wounded, and that was the majority of those left, were taken prisoner, but the Japanese reportedly murdered the other seriously wounded men, again, setting the stage for what the Japanese troops would do across the island and the number of massacres they carried out. So as the garrison's positions worsened, the East Brigade, again cut off from the west and its commander, retreated towards the Stanley Peninsula on the east side on the 19th itself as well, began a slow pullback. They became trapped basically on the outer environs of this peninsula, and again cut off, and they're desperate to hold their defensive lines again. They are slowly pushed back off these hills that make up the majority of the island. So the last attack by the Canadians occurred on Christmas Day, when D Company of the Royal Rifles is ordered to push back the Japanese holding positions inside Stanley Village on the peninsula. D Company had been fighting endlessly ever since the landings, and men were literally falling asleep on their feet And there's stories of them trying to get them awake and near impossible. They had to basically kick some of them to wake them back up to go for this counterattack. It was quite intense. So the attack initially goes quite well. They're able to push back the Japanese very quickly as they kind of launch a bayonet charge across open ground and get into these buildings that make up the village. But as with the entire battle, the Japanese defenders heavily outnumber the garrison defenders in terms of troops, but also in weapons. They can't hold off against the Japanese artillery that eventually starts raining down on their positions. So a retreat is ordered to pull back to the original positions. And unfortunately, the wounded have to be left behind. And again, it causes this quite an intense part of the fighting. And I've done quite a bit of research. And George MacDonnell, one of the two last surviving veterans of C-Force, has discussed this battle with me. And it's quite an intense one that he went through. And he vividly remembers all the details. So after this attack fails, this is basically where the Battle of Hong Kong comes to an end. The order to surrender eventually reaches D Company and the rest of the East Brigade later on that night. So this is, again, Canada's first battle in the Second World War. So 290 Canadians die in the fighting for Hong Kong. The garrison overall lost 955 killed, with 659 listed as missing. And as it turns out, most of these were killed in the various massacres I mentioned earlier. The Japanese numbers, again, are sketchy to get the details because of Japanese lack of records, but also burial practices where they cremated the dead lost in the battle. The Japanese lost 675 killed and just over 2,000 wounded. Again, it's more of an estimate than an actual determined number. So, like I already said, the Hong Kong's garrison surrenders on Christmas Day, and as Dr. Stanciu mentioned earlier. But this action doesn't bring the end to their suffering. As they enter prisoner of war camps in the colony, they faced years of starvation, all kinds of diseases, beatings, and murder, outright murder, at the hands of their Japanese guards. Some of the prisoners were sent to Japan aboard what has been dubbed the Hell Ships, where they were to work as slave laborers in mines, shipyards, factories, where many of them carried out acts of sabotage for years. Again, George MacDonnell was quite adamant that I point that out when I talk about this, that they carried out sabotage, and they actually shut down one of the shipyards outside Tokyo for an extended period due to this sabotage. So for those who survived, and again, a further 281 Canadians die in the Japanese camps and as slave laborers. But those who survived the ordeal of nearly 4 years of captivity are not freed until September 1945, when the war against Japan finally comes to an end, and they can get to them. And again, of course, it took some time because of logistical difficulties. And again, the space that just the Pacific takes up. It's not the easiest place to fight when it comes to logistics. So it took some time, but they were finally freed in 1945. But again, many of them faced all kinds of difficulties in the post-war years, medical issues, substance abuse, mental health problems. So again, this battle stuck with those who fought in it for a very, very long time.
Thank you, Dr. St Croix. Yet again, forgotten moments of Canadian military history that are so relevant, and just to find out about the enormous sacrifice that was caused by these battles is amazing and well, impressive. So there aren't that many relevant artifacts from these actions or coming in provenance of this action. To my knowledge, there is the medal set belonging to Brigadier J.K. Lawson, still in possession of the family, if I am not mistaken. But I am going to turn the image and show you an image of the defense site at Wang Knai Chong Gap. And here we are. So this image is of the headquarters at Wang Knai Chong Gap and various other units and the sites around the headquarters. So the brigade headquarters shelters over here. Brigadier Lawson body was found here. Company shelters for the company of Winnipeg Grenadiers, an ammunition storage, kitchen shelters, and a police station in this area. And of course, in the background, Mount Nicholson. We also have a few pieces of equipment issued to the Japanese Imperial Army, such as this Type 14 Nambu pistol. It was a series of semi-automatic pistols produced on a large scale in Japan. It was produced by Nagoya Arsenal and adopted as the official sidearm of the Imperial Japanese Army. It was in service for a very long time. And then the Type 38 Ariska rifle, I hope I am pronouncing this right. This is the rifle, bolt action rifle adopted by the Japanese in 1905, and it remained in service until the end of the Second World War. Now, neither of these items are in provenance of the Battle of Hong Kong, but I think it is safe to say that the same type of equipment was issued to the Japanese imperial troops that invaded the British garrison in Hong Kong in December 1941. So this Type 38 Ariska rifle, it has, and I'm not sure that it is very visible here. It has a chrysanthemum, which is the Japanese imperial seal, stamped somewhere around the ball, but I don't think it's visible because of the lighting. So it is the Japanese imperial stamp on top of the rifle indicates that it may have been captured just before the end of the war. We also have a M1932 Japanese helmet, which has a 5-pointed star, which can be visible on the other side of the display case. I am now inside the display case and I can't really move around. It's another regular equipment issued to Japanese Imperial Army. So I'm just going to conclude by showing you a number 4 Mark I sniper rifle, the SML adjusted to sniper uses. This would be the Canadian Army issued weapon. So it is likely that the force dispatched to the Pacific in 1941 was equipped with this type of weapon. Thank you everyone for participating, for sending your comments and questions. Thank you again, Dr. St Croix. And I will not conclude this presentation before thanking our tech support, the museum's public programmer, Ms. Sarah Coates. This concludes Curated Tour number 8 and the series for 2022. So from us at the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum, happy holidays to everyone. And check us on YouTube for the recorded Curated Tours. Thank you very much.